Hi, welcome to another meeting. My name is Jermaine. Thanks for joining me today. So today we're going to be, doing part 3 in our series on picking great stocks, how to pick great stocks. And so what we've been doing, if this is your first time here, I would have covered 2 previous videos. I'll do a brief recap at the start here, but you definitely want to check those videos out because it lays the foundation as to what we're going to talk about today. So today we're going to be speaking about qualitative analysis. So this is for all the persons not interested in numbers, non-technical. The numbers might, confuse them. They might get a little bit intimidated. So yeah, I mean, this session is really, if I could sum it up in one word, it's about research. So, and that's a very big part of picking stocks. Research. Anyone who is able to tell you which stocks to buy, likely it is they would have had to do some research before they could tell you. So what we're trying to do for you here at L.E.A.R.N Grow Invest is help you make your own decisions relating to investing. We want you to feel, competent and capable to pick your own stocks and have confidence that you're building a strong portfolio. Now, I must say the things that we'll cover here is not to be taken as financial advice. We are using a company from the Jamaica Stock Exchange, but we are not endorsing the company. We're just sharing our thoughts and our opinions about the process that we're covering. So we are a Christian investment community, and that means we open each session with a word of prayer. So I'm going to do that now. Thank you, Lord, for this day. Thank you for everyone who's going to be joining the session. We pray that it will be a time of information, knowledge. We pray that we will all grow as investors, and we pray that you will bless us in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So I'm just going to jump right into this. Let me share my screen. Okay. All right. So as I said, we are continuing the series on how to pick great stocks, and really it comes down to a personal decision for the investor after you've done your research, which stock seems more favorable to you, because it's not an exact process. And what I mean by that is when we take fundamental analysis into the equation, we're making decisions based on previous information, right? Financials typically would come out 2 or 3 months after the quarter has ended. And even sometimes when we look at the qualitative side, some of the information we may have is not always current, meaning it may be from a news article that we read a week ago, a month ago. And those things factor into the decisions that we make. And if we make it either on faulty information or outdated information, it may impact the validity of our pick, right? Hopefully that makes sense. If it does, let me know in the comments below. All right. So what we did a few weeks back, we started with, fundamental analysis. This is the process of going through financial statements, reports, and forecasts to evaluate a stock's potential. And this is important because we want to evaluate the potential to see if it matches what that difference is between the current price and the potential, right? So in part 1, we went through these 4 steps. And as I said, I'll link the video in the description and in the card above for you to watch part 1. And we looked at the 3 financial statements. As I said, details are in part 1. We looked at Wisynco, that's a company that we're using for this example that we're going through. And in part 2, we looked further at quantitative analysis using ratios. So we applied financial ratios to Wisynco. We looked at 4 types of ratios, and then we use that to determine how well they were performing, the health, how they manage debt, and so on. All that we would have done in session 2. I'll link that as well. You can watch that. And ratios, really what they serve to do is it gives us insight. So even if you don't understand whether or not the numbers are good or bad, the ratios will tell you based on what the benchmark is typically for that ratio, whether or not they're headed in the right direction, right? And it's also good to definitely apply ratios in context. So you don't take the ratios in a vacuum, you compare it with other companies in that same industry. And we looked at that last week as well, where we looked at the VM report for all the companies in the manufacturing sector, and we saw how Wisynco compared to those companies in terms of PE, book value, EPS, etc. So in part 3, that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at the qualitative aspect. And qualitative means it is subjective. It means that it's open to interpretation. It means that you and I can look at the very same information and draw 2 separate conclusions and make 2 separate decisions based on whether or not, after seeing that information, we're bearish or bullish on that stock. I'm gonna show you just a little bit of how I do market research as well. If you're interested in market research in general, we covered that topic with David Rose a few weeks back. That video will be on our channel. Just search for it, check that out. That's a good topic on research as well. We're gonna try and connect some of the dots based on the information we'll see for Wisynco. Try to figure out what it means. Is it good? Is it bad? So on. And then I'm gonna share some resources as usual, because I want to share with you all the links that I would have used and anything that I think would be helpful to you doing good research. All right. So now to the main point of this session. We're talking about qualitative analysis. So it says it's the nature or standard of something rather than its quantity. And what that means is that we're not measuring any financial information. We're not measuring anything that relates to quantity relating to the company. So we're looking at management. Sure, we may look at how the company performs in terms of their numbers as a reflection of how well management does, but we're looking at the things that can't, immediately jump out from just the financials. We're looking at the brand name. So for Wisynco, is that a strong brand? How long have they been around? What's the sentiment of Wisynco? When you hear the name Wisynco, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing for you? Do you use their products? All of those things we look at. Do they have any patents or any proprietary technology or partnerships? Are there partnerships that Wisynco have that put them at a clear advantage against their competitors? All of those things are based on qualitative factors. All right, so in terms of the differences between the two, so quantitative is anything that can be measured. Qualitative is anything that is natural or subjective, right? So it's really about the intangibles when we think about it. So how good is management? You're not going to see that on paper. It's not going to say, well, Jermaine is a manager. He's rated A. No, you'll see it in how well the company performs. The market share, that is something that, depending on the brand. So think of companies on the stock exchange that have 100% market share. Can you think of any of those companies? Let me know below in the comments which companies you can think of with 100% market share for a certain product or service. If any, meaning they're the sole provider or they have maybe 80% or more. I'm thinking of a few companies. Let me see what you can think of as well. So the very first place we want to start with in terms of qualitative research is the company's website. Like that's literally where we start, right? So the website, most companies, once they're a publicly listed company, they would have a website. So you want to check that out, see what it says, see how they position their products and services, what they think is important to share with you. Let me just say it that way. All right. So that's the first thing we do. And I'm going to demonstrate that right now. All right. So this is Wisynco's website. For all the shareholders of Wisynco, have you ever been to their website? So this is their website. Typically, what I focus on when I visit a company's website, I'm looking to see the products that they offer. So I go to the About Us page. I could see directors and management there. We spoke about that. So you can see maybe the history of the persons who are shown here. So for example, there's another company called 138 Student Living, where John Lee is a chairman for that company as well. So that's something interesting to note. So that's one that you could probably connect there, because unless you were here to see this or you would have read it somewhere, you may not have known that there is a potential relationship there, right? So we can scroll through and see the persons who are here in terms of management. Adam Stewart is well known. Some persons may know Odetta. So you can read about these persons, see their history, where they've worked. They usually would mention anything significant here. All of this is on their website. So we can look at the brands that they cover as well. So Water, Cran Water, Bigger. Are any of these names new to you? Probably not. You know all of these brands from marketing, from social media. They have a partners page as well. So you may see any partnerships that they have. So Coca-Cola, Tradewinds, Worthy Park, St. Mary's, and all of these brands here, Wisynco distributes. So you're already seeing or getting a very clear idea. If you've never looked into Wisynco before, you're already seeing just 3 minutes into their website, you have an idea of their product, you have an idea of their partnerships, you have an idea of their management, right? So there's an investor relations section for most public websites. This is where they typically put their notice of general meetings or anything that's notable about the company. So you want to go through this information. Their annual reports seem to be here as well. You could also find this on the Jamaica Stock Exchange website, but this information is here. So they have policies, announcements, quarterly reports. So what we're noticing here, because we would have seen on JSE last week, we're able to see the Q3 2021 report, which means Wisynco probably doesn't update this as often as the Jamaica Stock Exchange update theirs. So let me bring that on the screen. So this would be Jamaica Stock Exchange website. So I'm on the market data and Wisynco. So if you look in the address bar, the symbol is Wisynco. You can switch this around to any company. So I'm actually looking at Wisynco right now. Let me refresh it to be sure that it's updated. So from this page, I can go to annual reports here, audited financials, quarterly financials. I can see all of the information. So for annual reports, showing me the same thing. Quarterly financials, though, is what I was referring to. So this is a Q3 report. So usually whatever information I can't find on the website, I'll go to Jamaica Stock Exchange, because as a public company, they're required to submit these documents and reports to the Jamaica Stock Exchange in a timely manner. Some companies are not always on time, but if they're late, they should actually state a notice that they are late or something to that effect you would typically see, right? So all we're trying to do with this as we go through is just to pick up whatever information we can from the website, see what's there, see what it can tell us about the company. So if you're one of those persons who are interested in their core values, you want to be sure that you're aligning with companies that represent what you represent. You can look at their values. You can look at the history of the company to understand how long they've been about. You can look at the team, any news or updates that's there. So that's just from the website. All right. So all of that information we got just now was from their website. The next place that we want to look at is the annual report, and would have done that last week when we applied the ratios, and in the first week as well. We go through the annual report because, one, it is something that will give us an idea of how they performed for the entire year. What I noticed is in Wisynco's report, they actually had information for the previous 4 years as well, so I was able to compare and contrast how they did on a yearly basis. And I'm going to show you that as well. So we're going to look at the annual report now. So let's go back. Let's go to annual report. We're going to click on the 2020 report. There it is. So this is their 2020 annual report. It is 142 pages, right? So naturally, since it's 142 pages, I don't read all of the report normally. I go to some key areas, and that's what I'll share with you now. If you do have the time, definitely go through it. But after you've read 5, 10, 15 or more of these reports, you may go to certain key pieces of information to get an understanding of the company. So for the annual report, the company takes the opportunity to, it's about the presentation and it's about the data. So the key contents of this report, though, you want to look at is the chairman and CEO's report. You want to look at the management discussion and analysis. That's very important. You want to look at the financial highlights. And depending on what areas may stick out from there, you may or may not choose to look at. I sometimes would look at, like top 10 shareholders. Those pieces of information may help me, and I'll talk to you a little bit about how we use that later on. All right. So the first thing we're going to look at is the chairman and CEO's report from the annual report. I'm just going to scroll through. So if you're not familiar with the company at all, the annual report should start with information about them, how they started, what brands they focus on. All of that information is in the annual report. What I personally liked from the report that I saw when I was reading it is that, they said, priorities in life should be God first, family second, country, and then company. That stood out to me, right? So that was very good to see. And so the chairman and CEO's report now, we're going to hear from the chairman. So a lot of persons know, for example, Warren Buffett is famous for his report that he would share for Berkshire Hathaway each year. You can get a lot about what the CEO has to say, how he sees the company, where the company is headed from this section. As it relates to the operations and the numbers, you can expect that to be consistent. So everything here relating to numbers and performance over a quarter, that you will see from the highlights for the financial statements themselves. But what you're looking for is any resolutions for the company, any new areas of focus, how they're treating with the pandemic, and what they have to say about it. At this point last year, for June 2020, when their financial year ended, would have been 3 months into the pandemic. So they would have been commenting on that. And you can go through, you're seeing key things like suspension of tourism activities and the loss of employment in that sector, the closure of restaurants and schools. All of that would have had an impact on brands like Water, Crown Water, Bigger, True Juice, so on, because the hotels, if they're closed, this is going to impact the revenue that Wisynco is able to generate. and we saw from the NCB report that revenue has dropped about 6% on average per quarter for every quarter of this year. So we looked at that and we said, okay, they're likely to either do similar to last year or a little bit better, only because we saw where they said, well, the bigger brand in the UK was doing 50% better. So we don't know fully what that final number will be. So they may be marginally better in terms of performance than they did last year, which is why we would have seen NCB's report saying, well, they don't think they have a great jump in terms of price. But of course, after you analyze the data for yourself, you may come to a different conclusion. All right. So we just, read it through, and, they're talking about, expanding, talking about, what the plan is moving forward. All of this information, when you read it, it will make sense to you, meaning it's typically non-technical speak. It's easy to understand. Just think about it as a company would think about, strategy, competitive advantage, wanting to assure shareholders of that, better days are coming, things like that. The next section that we wanted to look at, if you weren't aware of who the board of directors were from the website, you could look at it here. I'm just going to scroll through this because you should be able to get that from the website or look at it in your own time. But these are the same persons would have seen on the website where it mentioned directors and management. All right. So I'm going to scroll through and go next to the management discussion. Wish I remembered the page that it was on. Okay, let me stop here for a sec. So this piece of information is typically interesting for me to know the top 10 shareholders. Now, sometimes how I've seen this information, let's say that you look at the queue on JTrader and you see, for example, 23,913,562 units of Wisynco available for sale. You could make the assumption that the Sagicor fund is liquidating their position in Wisynco. So sometimes when you know the units that the top 10 shareholders will hold for the different companies, you can then understand who is selling, because sometimes depending on the volume of units, it's not always clear, but sometimes you can connect the dots and see who is selling when based on the number of units and the information that you see here. So if let me give you one more example. If we saw somebody selling 100 million shares, it could only be the group itself selling that, because no other shareholder would have 100 million shares. All right, does that make sense? So think about it that way. You also get here a listing of the shares per director. So again, you could see, if you see, for example, this number is at June 2020. You may look at the 2021 report. Lisa might have purchased more or sold some. Devon might have purchased more or sold some. But typically what you want to see is directors willing to own pieces of the company that they're directing, because it shows that they're bullish about the company as well. Now, that's not always the case. It's not a blanket statement there, because we say, for example, Joseph Mahfood has 0. John Lee has 0, right? But it's not something that you just say, well, if then, do that. But it's always good to have this information, see if the directors are investing in their own company. A lot of persons look to that to say, well, if you see directors buying more when a new report is expected or some other news are expected, then it could signal that either the long term is going to be good or the immediate report is going to be good. All right. And then we see the shares of the senior executives. So again, if you ever see this exact number in the queue being sold, it could be that you look at this report and see who could be possibly selling that. Typically, you can confirm this news later on or within the next report. The next part, corporate governance is also good to look at. I won't spend much time there though. All right, so the next part is the financial highlights. So this would be their commentary on the reports that would have been released. And we went through this report already. We looked at these numbers in the first part of this series. So if you want to see our take on that, check out that video. But these are just report. If you read this and then you look at the report, you'll see the same information. So this is what I was saying. They were able to show a 5-year analysis, of their performance. So from 2016 to 2017, 2018, we can see steady increase in revenue throughout that time. The next thing we see is cost of sales, and they would have seen how that. So typically, once you increase in revenue, cost of generating that revenue would typically increase as well. But what you want to see, as we would have shown last week, is the operating margin. So the operating margin is telling because you get to see how much money it costs to generate the revenue, right? So I'm not going to go through this, but it's good to just look at the initial numbers and see over a 5-year period, how they were performing. So we're going to use this information next week when we look at valuing the company. We're going to show how you can calculate an estimated value for Wisynco stock using the financial information and what we call a discounted cash flow model. So that's what we look at next week. So I'll just move on from here, but this is the data that you'd see in the financial reports. All right. So they would comment here on their stock price, how it did, throughout the year. They're showing you that when they first listed their IPO, it was $7.87. So if you bought it from IPO, you'd be up about 100% right now. That's in 2017. And they'd share report about their operations and manufacturing. This is all good information to go through. It's showing you that no new alliances were formed here. And looking ahead, you always want to look at this part because it shows what they're anticipating to come. So it says, the pandemic will continue to temper activity in tourism. And we would have seen that when we saw that throughout the year. And we also see where, since things are loosening up a little bit, we are anticipating that things may be a little bit better for them as the quarters progress. So the next area that I'm going to look at is the management discussion and analysis. That's where I want to show you next. That's the report already that we would have gone through. Did I go through that already? Let me just do a quick scroll. Because it's in the web browser, I can't go directly to the page I want. All right, let me go all the way back to the top. Okay, page 33. Okay, so it came up. Okay, yes, we did cover that section already. Sorry about that. So the management discussion and analysis is a very good section to read. It's 2 pages. You want to read through that thoroughly. It will give you the management perspective on their operations, how they performed, what they're anticipating the future will be. That's some useful information when you're doing qualitative analysis. All right. So that's the annual report that we just looked at. So the key areas that you want to take from that: the CEO's report, the MD&A, the financials, and any other relevant summary that would have been there. So as I said, for me, I look at the top 10 shareholders. I look at anything that would stand out in terms of information relating to risk or the climate or their competitors, anything that can help me determine what could impact their stock price. And if I'm investing in the short term, that's useful information. If I'm holding it for the long term, that's useful information as well, because that will help me. And I would have shared this information from the report itself already. And I'll share the link to the annual report in the chat right now. Let me do that. So the annual report is here. All right, so the next part we're going to look at is annual general meetings or AGMs. Now, if you've never been to an AGM before, it's actually quite useful to attend. Typically, you get the same overview that will be in the report, but you have an opportunity to hear from the company themselves. They may be represented by maybe their broker in some cases. If they have a close relationship with one, they will typically be able to answer your questions in person. So if you said, well, how are you going to treat with this risk? Somebody will be there to answer it. You also have the ability to vote. If there are any decisions that require voting as a shareholder, you have that right to be there. Your vote counts. And so it's good to take part in the AGMs for companies that you're looking at for the long term. If it's a short term trade, I'm not really seeing where the AGM may have a major impact, unless it is that they announce something coming out of the AGM that could have a positive impact on the price for the next few weeks. All right. And we would have seen the notice on the website about AGM already. So right now we're going to look at some news that I would have just collected over the past couple of months about Wisynco. And we're going to look and see, and I'm going to see what the news would have to say and how persons might have reacted to that news. All right, let me show you what I mean. So the first article, it says that Wisynco is expecting bigger revenue growth. And so going to the article, and we would have seen this already. So we saw this in the Analyst Report by NCB. So this is an example of something that may give investors confidence into how the company may perform at the end of their year. So the date of this article is, when was the date of this one? Let me see. May 18th. So this would have been within their last quarter. So if you're seeing news like this at the end, in the last quarter, that is potentially saying, at least as it relates to that segment within the brand, that is expected to perform well. Now, how well, we're not sure, because it just says revenue growth here. So we'd have to read more from here, and we see where it would have bought back the soft drinks brought it back to its plant. It would have done that based on the end of an agreement that they had with a partner in the UK, and then speaks a little bit about that. So these articles are usually easy to read. I filter them based on the companies that I have in my portfolio alone. So for the purposes of this session, I just did a web search. So if you do a Google search for Wisynco, just say Wisynco, and I find if you search for the company alone, you may not get the type of results that you want. So I search for Wisynco and the newspaper. So Wisynco Gleaner, then I can see any articles that would have been published by the Gleaner as it relates to Wisynco. So this is where I would have gotten that article from. There's another article in January about them eyeing share buyback. So that's one we're going to look at next. Before that, the last one was in 2019 when they would have been eyeing to cut their energy by 1 million US, and we would have seen that referenced in the article about their operations being impacted positively in terms of cost. So how you treat with the news is that typically they will report on something to come. That's a positive thing. Then the thing will happen. That's positive as well. All right, let me try that. Let me try what Simon is saying. That's it. All right, so what Simon is saying from Stocks on the Rocks is that if you type in the company and news, then you'll get to see all the news in chronological order, which is pretty cool. I never knew that. So that would be good to check out. So let's see what that first one says. Maybe it's something new that we haven't seen before. So this news update would be directly from their website. We did see on the About Us page there was news and updates there. Okay, I see what you're saying. So news. Okay, cool. All right, thank you. All right, so would have seen that article. Let's see what this one says. Let's see. I'm looking. So when I go through this, I'm doing a quick scroll to see if there's anything relating to Wisynco. And then I would see, how that relates to, is it positive news? What is it, Orville? So there's a way in which, so there is, so you go through this article, see if it gives you any information relating to Wisynco, if it's good news, you can test to say, okay, how did the market react to that news? And over time, you may be able to anticipate certain reactions to certain types of news. So a little bit later, we'll speak about what drives stock price, and I'll talk about that a little bit more there. But you want to go through these. This was a week ago. Typically, I would look at anything that relates to the company within the financial year, right? So since their financial year ended June, I would go as far back as maybe last year, summer, see if there's anything, because typically they would speak to things that are going to come. And then once they come, then persons are bullish or bearish about it, or they don't react, at all. It right, Orville. So yeah, so that's pretty much what you'd go through this article, and you'd get an understanding as to how things may be shaping up in that regard. The next one, it spoke about in January share buyback. We see here that they anticipate export growth. That's from the Observer article. Let me see if I can find that one. So that's this one here. And if you think back to when we looked at the analyst report from NCB, it says this same thing. So this is confirming information we would have seen in one place, that there is an anticipation for growth through their overseas market. So you read through this information, it may give you an understanding as to the history of performance, maybe project as to how things may be. It's hard for them to ever really say how well they'll end the quarter, but if they're anticipating growth, is either through partnerships or how revenue would have been to that point that the article is being written, things like that will lead to a report like this. And what you can do is now match that with the analyst report, match that with your own research, and say, well, I don't have the numbers for the last quarter as yet, but if they're anticipating growth, when we're doing our forecasting for what their numbers may be, we may factor in a slight increase depending on what we think that growth may look like. So we'll cover that next week. All right. So hopefully that makes sense. So as we said, just it's research. Another way in which I research, and I'll show you that as well here, I would go to social media and search for the company. So I go to like Twitter, for example, and I search for Wisynco, and I would do something like this, right? So I'm gone to Twitter and I'm just gonna search. Sometimes you may see a tweet, you may see, something that can give you insight that you may not have seen in a news article anywhere. Now, I mean, it's not always the case because typically you'd probably see the same article, but you want to go through and see what persons are saying about Wisynco. This may help when we get to the sentiment aspect of looking at the company. But we would have seen this article already. But if you're on Twitter, somebody would have posted this. You can click on this and you can see it here as well. So this is one of the places that I would look as well. All right. So in terms of competitor analysis, we want to think about, so depending on the company, you want to look at direct competition and also competition within industry. Now, a company like Wisynco, based on the fact, I believe their report said they distribute over 192 different brands or 182 different brands. It's going to be hard to say their competition is X. So there are multiple ways that you may want to do a competitor analysis, because one, they operate in multiple territories, they have multiple products. So when you're comparing them, you may want to look at key aspects. So from a high level, you may say, okay, they do a lot of business, through schools. All right, what are the major competitors to that supply chain? All right, they do a lot of business with hotels. What competition do they have in that space? All right, they export a lot. What are the potential competitors that may impact their revenue within that space? And you can research those competitors, see how they do, see how they report, see how they forecast their own numbers, and you can get an understanding as to how well the industry might do, and then the companies within that industry. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. So when you research one company, it typically leads you. When you research one company, it typically leads you to research other companies within that industry as well. It just makes sense, right? So as you learn more about one company, so if you're researching Microsoft, you may research Apple. Well, let me use local companies before Orville, call me out on it. If you're researching NCB, then you might research JMMB, then you might research, Scotiabank. That's how research typically goes, right? You want to understand the company, then the industry, because when you do the financial ratios or your other comparative analysis, it has to be in context of the industry. All right. So that's what we mean by competitor analysis. All right. So the next thing that we want to do is look at the key drivers now. So two things that we want to focus on here. We want to focus on the key drivers for the stock, while understanding what are our key drivers for stocks in general. So can you tell me what some of those are? What do you think are our key drivers for stock prices? If you're watching this on the replay, just post it in the comment below. All right, so one of the first key drivers of stock price, we hear this all the time, that is supply and demand, right? And it's the key drivers of product prices in general. If you think about it, if there's a shortage of something, then there is likely to be an increase in price. Whereas if something is flooding the market, there's a lot of it, there are a lot of imitations of it, it may lower the price. All right. The next thing is earnings, right? So Stocks on the Rock said it. Earnings drive prices. So the anticipation of good earnings and good earnings drives the stock price. So this is something that you want to be aware of. So what brand new investors would do, the earnings will come out today. Stock price starts to move up, and then next week or the week after, they're like, okay, let me buy this stock that has now gone up 10, 20, 30% maybe in the last 2 weeks. They buy it maybe at an all-time high, and then there might be a slight correction, and then it goes back down, and they're like, well, I don't understand how to buy stocks. And that's typically because you want to understand, research the company, anticipate the results, buy before, and then the results will actually tell you whether or not you're right or wrong, right? It's better to go in at a certain price, take a small loss if it is you aren't planning to keep it long-term. If you're keeping it long-term, then it won't matter. Then as the report comes out, if persons are now reacting positively, because as an investor, you want to act before the market acts. So if you do your assessment on the company, you see that it's going to do well, buy it from now, right? Persons kind of like to wait to see things moving. You buy the stock today, it inches down. You're like, let me sell it. It's not going anywhere. Earnings comes out, it goes up there, and like, the next thing that you want to look at are the behavioral factors. Now, persons sell stocks for different reasons, right? I may sell this stock because I need some money. I may sell it because I see another opportunity. I may sell it because I need to go and pay for something or whatever it is. And depending on the urgency of the need, I may be willing to wait. So I may put a price for Wisynco to be sold. And let's actually look at Wisynco's queue. Let me do that right now. I think that'd be a meaningful exercise for you guys. And I saw someone mention news as well. That is definitely correct. I'm logging into JTrader. I'm not sharing my screen as yet because I don't want you to see my account. Okay, Wisynco. All right, here we go. So this would be Wisynco for as at today. There are persons who may say, well, I'm going to post my selling price for Wisynco at $52, right? That's what this person is saying. They have 8,000 units and they're putting it for sale at $52. It doesn't matter when. That's their target price. Well, they could have an order that expires after a certain date, or it could be, stay there until filled. And we'll look at JTrader sometime next month. So if you're not familiar with JTrader, we'll be covering it soon. But these persons would have determined their price. Now, if I come in and say, well, I really want to sell my 5,000 units of Wisynco, if I want to sell it at $16, what that would mean is that all these orders here would need to be filled before my units can be sold at $16. And if I'm placing the order in the queue right now, it would be placed after all of these orders. Right? So if you do that math, that's maybe about 4 million units almost that would have to be sold before I sell 5,000 units. So I may say, well, that doesn't make sense. I can't wait. Let me post this for $15.78. But hold on, there's no matching order for this in the queue. If I wanted to sell 5,000 units right now, I could put it for 1570 or market, and then it would take from this order, and I'd be able to sell those units. But what that would mean is that the closing price would have been 575. If it sells at 570, then it would have gone down by whatever percentage change. That's pretty much what we mean when we say, well, depending on the reason that somebody is selling, you may not fully understand it. There are ways that you could use technical analysis to maybe assess the market as a whole, but there's no way to tell the individual behavior. What we typically would do is group them and say, well, maybe the market is bullish because overall the price trended down, or bearish, or they're bullish because the price went up. All right. So what does this all mean for Wisynco? All right. So looking back at that queue, we see that, a certain, there was one particular order that I saw that stood out for me. There's a buy order for 5 million units at $15, right? That's those things stand out to me. For me, when I see an order like this, I'm thinking it's either a fund or something, somebody with large capital, because $15, this is 75 million before fees, right? So persons with that money are either the persons who are rich, or there's a fund, or there's another, investor with capital to purchase this many units. And we also see persons who are willing to sell as well. So this sometimes, these persons may say, well, based on the other things that I have to do, I'm willing to accept $15.99. We don't know if they have it from IPO. We don't know. So we have to, I'm actually not zoomed in. Sorry about that. So based on these orders, you can look to see how the market is possibly looking to either offload units, or maybe persons are, gearing up to buy more units. You could maybe use that. And we also look a little bit at, how the price would have been trending over time. This is not a technical analysis session, but what I do just from this chart is just try to see, where the price is headed. I also look at volume. Volume is very important for me, because if the price is moving but it's very low volume, what that says to me is that, majority of the market is not bullish or bearish. It could just be persons who, need to get capital. It's small amount of units. It's nothing major. No, this is 1 million units that would have traded on this day. But apart from that, over the last 3 months, the most that have been traded in the one day is 1 million units. And we saw where there was 3 billion shares available. So 1 million is a very small amount compared to the overall number of shares outstanding for Wisynco. All right. So let us move on back to key drivers. So you want to think about the things that may impact Wisynco's price. If you're anticipating earnings to be good, then you want to position yourself for that. If you're anticipating it to be bad, you want to look at what persons are saying on social media about it, but take those with a grain of salt, please, right? Social media is also a place where persons, depending on their intent, could maybe mislead, right? So you want to take maybe multiple persons and their sentiment, and not just one person. Because if one person say, I'm selling all of my Wisynco, it may not mean that the company the price may not move from that one person. Whereas if a number of persons are putting out reports to say, well, company performance is poor, this company is undervalued. If we see multiple analyst reports saying the same thing, then it could signal a short-term bearish sentiment for the company, and that could impact their price. So those are the things that you want to kind of collate as to an overall sentiment, but sentiment is inexact by its very nature. you can't quantify sentiment because we may poll everyone on this live right now and we have one sentiment. We poll persons who work at the company, we get a different sentiment. We poll persons in schools. So sentiment is one of those things that you want to find sources that may have a particular influence that may drive the short-term performance one way or another. If you're long-term though, you don't really want to think about it much, is I would say. All right. Hopefully that was not all over the place. And the last part you want to look at for qualitative analysis is the analyst report. If you want to get access to the reports, sign up to that broker. I find most of the companies do fairly decent reports. What I will say about the analyst report, I'll say this based on my fair assessment. I've seen reports that are impartial, are objective. I've seen reports that tend to be a little bit on the subjective side. So you want to read it carefully. You want to see if a broker is really kind of just positioning this stock above other stocks because maybe it's the lead broker, right? So little things like that sometimes can shape the sentiment of the report itself. But for the most part, what I've seen are fair reports that would, talk about the numbers, talk about the outlook, and those you want to factor into your own research and see, how that can help you make a concrete decision. All right. So that is it for my session today. Are there any questions? All right, I'm going to pause on this slide. Are there any questions? All right, so for persons who want to understand how to use everything that we've shared over the last 3 weeks, next week what we're going to do is we're going to look at how to forecast earnings. And we're going to take everything that we did in the last 4 weeks, have one meeting now to put everything together in a short workflow so that you can go from start to finish how to analyze a stock and make a decision on it. All right. So that's the hope for 2 meetings from now. I'm just going to do one session to recap everything at a very, very high level. If you want the details though, you want to watch each individual video and see how we put everything together. And, this is, most of the process that I use in some way, shape or form to analyze a company. The only thing that would be missing from this, I also look at the analyst report, and let me go back to that point. I typically look to see the sentiment from the analysts in terms of what they think the target price would be. So there's usually a range for that target price, especially with IPOs, you would see it. So if an IPO is going to list at $1, you may say one agent says that one broker says, okay, fair value we think is $1.20. One may say $1.50. One may say we think it's overpriced and it's worth 90 cents. And I look at all of that. I read as much information as I can, and I get an understanding. Okay, if you think about it, if that broker is saying that the stock is overpriced, you can understand that they're going to be recommending to all of their customers not to buy. So they're likely going to be recommending a sell. Depending on how their customers respond, they may say, okay, well, this broker is telling me to sell this stock. Let me go to my JTrade and sell it, or let me put in a sell order and sell that stock. Now, for the brokers who are bullish and say, well, that IPO is underpriced and fair value is $150, they would be telling their customers to buy. So when they send out their weekly reports, they would be saying buy that IPO because it's underpriced. And that sometimes I think factors into a little bit of what we see as well. If everybody is recommending the stock as a buy, then that would normally mean that persons are now saying, okay, well, if everybody's recommending, if the sentiment is high, it may be a good addition. Now, depending on how they may choose to respond, I mean, time will tell. But I've noticed that as well when everybody says buy and everybody has a healthy margin in terms of target price, then, you know, sometimes I'll see the market respond favorably in that regard. All right. So next from here, the links I would have already shared. And this is the end of part 3. In terms of next part, we're going to look at, okay, so bullish. What bullish means is that I have a positive outlook on that stock. So if I'm bullish, it means that I'm anticipating that it has more to grow, things are going to go well. And if I'm bearish means that I'm thinking that it has no more room to grow, or in the future it's not going to do as well as it's currently doing. Those are, you know, simple ways to explain the term. All right. So in terms of next week, we're going to look at stock valuation. So we're going to take the 5-year financials for Wisynco and calculate what we think would be its potential value based on that information. That's what we're going to be looking at. I'm going to recap the entire, you know, analysis that I would have been doing for the past 3 weeks. And as usual, I'm just going to share any links with you. So that is it. Hopefully you guys would have found some value from this. I'll pause for a moment for any questions that may be there. You're free to leave your questions in the comments below if you're watching this video on the replay. But yeah, I wanted to keep the session to exactly 1 hour. So that's where we are. I'm not going to go any further, but if you have any questions, let me know now. You know, otherwise I'll wrap up. All right, cool. So I'm not seeing any questions. I'll invite you guys to join me on Twitter on Saturday. We're going to be doing a Q&A with some of my friends who are a part of the investment space. We'll be answering questions. If you have things that you want to know about investing on JSE, you can join us for that session. We're going to start at 6. Hopefully we're going to go for at least 2 hours. So you should be able to get some, you know, get opportunity to ask any questions. You can tweet them to us or you can ask them live. And as well, I want to encourage you guys to, you know, follow us on social media. We're on all major platforms. We have conversations going in our Facebook group where persons ask questions. If you want a deeper explanation and we're able to provide in some of these videos, the Facebook group is where you want to join. We're on Instagram as well. If you're watching this on YouTube, which it's the only platform we have, we ask you to subscribe. Please leave the video a like. It helps us a lot. And thank you so much for watching. I will see you next week.